Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. I rubbed my temples, squinting at the glowing screen in front of me. Lines of code stared back, indifferent and cold. It was another late night at the office, one of many that had started to pile up like forgotten receipts. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead barely registered as my mind drifted, drawn away from work and into the quiet spaces that had started appearing in my life. Lucy and I had been married for a decade. We were that couple everyone seemed to admire: steady jobs, a charming home, two beautiful children, Emma, 13, and Daniel, 11, who brought life and noise to our suburban routine. On the surface, everything clicked into place like a puzzle perfectly assembled. But behind that picture, something had shifted. I just didn't know what yet. Lucy's laughter was the first to change. It used to be full and contagious, a sound that made our kitchen and living room feel alive. Lately, though, it had taken on an edge, a strain. She'd brush off my concern with practiced ease. "Work's just been a lot, Mark. You know how it is." And I did. We both worked for the same marketing firm, me in IT, her as a client liaison. Our paths crossed enough at the office for me to know when she was on edge, but not enough for me to know why. The day the invitation arrived, Lucy was the one to open it. I came home to find her standing at the kitchen counter, the white envelope fluttering in her hand like a victory flag. Her eyes lit up as she read, then darted to mine. "We've been invited," she said, the words brimming with excitement. "A weekend on a private island, hosted by William Fellows himself." I leaned against the doorway, watching her. There was a sparkle in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. The name rang a bell: William Fellows, the enigmatic magnate who had recently become our firm's most valuable client. Rumor had it that his wealth ran deeper than the lakes surrounding his estate. "It's a big deal, isn't it?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. She nodded, barely containing her smile. "It's a huge deal, Mark. He doesn't do this for just anyone." I tried to share in her excitement, but a sliver of unease curled around my chest. Still, I swallowed it down, convincing myself that my wariness was born of overwork, not reason. The day we left for the island was a blur of logistics and last-minute arrangements. Our kids would stay with my parents for the weekend, which they didn't mind in the slightest. Emma was already planning movie nights and board games, while Daniel packed half his Lego collection as if preparing for battle. "Be good for Grandma and Grandpa," I said as we dropped them off. Emma rolled her eyes, a teenager's trademark, but Daniel hugged me tight. "Will you bring back something cool, Dad?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. I forced a smile. "Of course, buddy." The flight was luxurious, as one would expect from a man like Fellows. Lucy chatted with the other invited guests, colleagues and their spouses, while I kept to my seat, flipping through a magazine that blurred under my gaze. The plane hummed with a subdued excitement, laughter bubbling up from groups at regular intervals. When we landed, the island itself felt like stepping into a mirage. White sand, clear waters, and a sprawling mansion that looked more like a palace than a home. Lucy's hand tightened around mine as we approached the main entrance, where Fellows himself stood with a practiced smile. "Welcome," he said, his voice rich and smooth. He shook my hand, his grip firm, eyes sizing me up before drifting to Lucy. "I'm glad you could make it," he added, a subtle note of familiarity in his tone that I couldn't quite place. Throughout the day, it became apparent that William Fellows was not just our host but the center of every orbit. He moved through conversations with ease, shifting attention with a practiced touch that made each person feel seen. When he spoke to Lucy, though, I noticed something different, a warmth that seemed to settle between them. I pushed the thought aside. Jealousy was a disease of the insecure, and I prided myself on being better than that. Later, while the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the world in gold, we sat on the wide veranda overlooking the bay. The group was lively, glasses clinking, stories spilling out over the din of the sea. Fellows leaned back in his chair, his eyes never straying far from the group but always returning to Lucy. She laughed at something he said, a sound that was fuller, unrestrained. The unease I'd felt in the weeks leading up to the trip stirred again, but I masked it behind a smile. We all toasted to new alliances, to futures brighter than the glistening waters that surrounded us. That night, Lucy was more animated than I'd seen her in ages. Her touches were softer, her gaze open and clear as she whispered words of love against my skin. It was like we had stepped back in time, to a place where there were no kids, no late nights at the office, no half-buried resentments. The next morning, I awoke alone in bed. I found her on the terrace, wrapped in a light robe, looking out at the horizon. She turned when she heard my footsteps, a soft smile on her lips. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah," I replied, the word heavy with meaning I couldn't articulate. And then, like the tide that would come in to erase footprints, the unease settled deeper. The morning air carried the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus as I joined Lucy on the terrace. She was already deep in conversation with William Fellows, who stood with a glass of orange juice in hand, exuding an effortless confidence that made my presence feel intrusive. He glanced over as I approached, his expression morphing into that impeccable host smile. "Morning, Mark. I trust you slept well." His eyes didn't leave mine, and I felt the subtle challenge within them. "Morning, William." "Yeah, I did," I said, shifting my gaze to Lucy, who seemed suddenly aware of the tension. She touched my arm lightly. "You should try the coffee, Mark. It's incredible." I nodded, mumbling something about needing caffeine, and stepped away to the buffet table where other guests chatted in low tones. The conversation hummed with energy about the previous night's dinner and the weekend's planned excursions. But as I poured my coffee, I kept an eye on the terrace. The way Lucy leaned in when William spoke, the smile that lingered on her face, it was like watching someone I didn't quite know. "Hell of a place, isn't it?" a voice beside me said. I turned to see Kevin, one of the firm's directors, balancing a plate of fruit and eggs. He was affable, with a permanent twinkle in his eye that softened the deep lines on his face. "Yeah, it's something," I said, trying to match his easy tone. Kevin's gaze followed mine to Lucy and William. He nodded knowingly. "Fellows has a way of drawing people in, doesn't he? Makes you feel like the only one in the room." I forced a chuckle, trying to push away the gnawing discomfort. "Yeah, he does." The morning wore on with planned activities, snorkeling, a tour of the island's lush trails, and a casual lunch where William sat at the center of a long table, dispensing stories of his travels and business conquests. Lucy, seated across from me, seemed captivated by every word. I tried to join in, contributing here and there, but felt like an outsider. It was subtle at first, but the realization that something was shifting hit harder with each passing hour. By the time evening came, the mansion glowed under a cascade of fairy lights strung across the open-air dining area. The guests were dressed in their finest, anticipation crackling in the air. Lucy emerged from our suite in a red satin dress that hugged her figure, eyes sparkling with something I couldn't place. It made me pause, admiration mixing with a pinch of unease. "Wow," I said, taking her hand as she reached for mine. She smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Thank you. You look great too." Her voice was warm, affectionate even, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, hesitation, or maybe guilt. William led the dinner that night with his usual charm. Laughter and wine flowed freely, but the ease I'd once felt around Lucy felt out of reach. She was attentive to me, but her gaze often drifted toward the head of the table. When the main course was served, William stood and made an announcement that had the crowd leaning forward. "I'm grateful to share this weekend with some of the brightest, most intriguing people I know," he began, his voice low and magnetic. "Tomorrow, before we part ways, I'd like to offer a toast to future collaborations and friendships that will last far beyond this island." Applause broke out, and Lucy glanced at me, her smile radiant. I returned it, but with an effort that made my jaw ache. I picked at my food, the flavors bland against the bitterness welling in my chest. The night ended with drinks and dancing. I watched Lucy from the sidelines as she moved with ease, laughing with some of the guests, her joy unguarded. William, too, made the rounds, his attention fixed on everyone yet somehow mostly on her. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then he approached, catching her hand mid-laugh, and they spun in a brief dance that left the room buzzing. The moment was fleeting but enough to solidify the knot in my gut. "Mark, come join us," Lucy called, her eyes bright. She reached for me, the gesture open and loving, but it felt like a spotlight had been turned on us. The other guests looked on, expressions varying from amusement to subtle judgment. I forced a smile and walked over, stepping into the circle she had made. The dance was brief. I could barely feel the music, my steps mechanical. As the night wound down, I found myself clinging to the remnants of normalcy. Lucy kissed me on the cheek as we left the dance floor, whispering, "I love you." It sounded sincere, but doubts sharpened the edges of the words. Back in our room, I watched her take off her earrings, her reflection in the mirror lost in thought. I wanted to ask her if something had changed, but fear held me back. Instead, I slipped off my shoes, letting the silence fill the space between us. "Did you enjoy tonight?" she asked, catching my gaze in the mirror. "It was nice," I said, the lie sour on my tongue. I walked over and placed my hands on her shoulders, feeling the tension beneath her skin. "You seemed happy." She turned, eyes searching mine. For a moment, I thought she'd say something, anything that would explain the chasm growing between us. But she just leaned in and kissed me, soft and brief, before stepping away to the bed. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's our last day here," she said, sliding under the covers. I nodded, turning out the light, and lay beside her, listening to the whisper of the ocean outside. But even in the dark, the gulf between us felt insurmountable, like the deep water that surrounded the island, impossible to navigate without losing sight of the shore. The morning air held a crispness that felt almost surreal against the backdrop of the island's paradisiacal beauty. I woke to the sight of Lucy sitting on the balcony, bathed in the golden spill of dawn. She was wrapped in a light throw, her eyes distant as she stared out over the turquoise waters. For a moment, I just watched her, a memory of our early days together fluttering in my mind, days when she'd pull me out of bed to chase sunrises, laughing as we raced to catch the first light. "Morning," I said softly as I stepped out onto the balcony. She turned, her expression a mix of warmth and something else, something I couldn't read. "Morning, Mark," she replied, her voice just above a whisper. She shifted to make space for me on the small couch. I sat down, feeling the coolness of the morning air sink through my shirt. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, it was a silence filled with unasked questions. "Beautiful view," I ventured, grasping for anything to break the tension. "It is," she agreed, though her gaze never left the horizon. We sat like that for a while, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant crash of waves. I wanted to ask her why she seemed so far away, why the space between us felt like miles instead of inches. But before I could speak, she stood up, dropping the throw on the chair. "I'm going to get ready for breakfast. Want to come with me?" she asked, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, flashing in her eyes. "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. But as she walked past me, I caught the faint scent of her perfume mixed with something sharper, unfamiliar. The unease I'd felt since the beginning of the trip coiled tighter around my chest. Breakfast was a blur of small talk and clinking glasses. William Fellows, always the perfect host, mingled effortlessly, his laughter punctuating the air. Lucy sat across from me, animated in conversation with one of the guests, her smile wide and genuine. But my attention kept drifting back to William, who seemed to track her every movement with an interest that made my blood simmer. "Mark, you all right?" Kevin's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. He had slid into the chair beside me, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, stirring my coffee as if it could give me the answers I needed. Kevin chuckled. "These weekends can be a lot. Fellows sure knows how to host, though, doesn't he?" "Yeah," I muttered, watching as William leaned down to say something to Lucy. She laughed, and the sound, which used to be mine, now felt like it belonged to someone else. The rest of the day was filled with group activities, kayaking and hiking, each moment designed to entertain and distract. I played my part, smiling at the right moments, nodding during conversations, but I felt like an actor reading lines to a play I no longer understood. It wasn't until the sun began to dip, turning the sky into a canvas of deep orange and purple, that the final event of the day was announced, a dinner under the stars, followed by a toast to the future. We were encouraged to dress in our best, a nod to the splendor that William liked to cultivate. Back in our room, Lucy slipped into a dress that shimmered like liquid gold. She caught me watching her and smiled, a touch of nervousness in her eyes. "What do you think?" she asked, turning slightly. "You look beautiful," I said, meaning it. She did, and it hurt to say it, knowing that beauty was now tinged with uncertainty. We walked down to the open-air dining area, lit with candles and twinkling lights strung from palm trees. The ocean provided a steady, soothing background to the laughter and chatter of the guests. As we took our seats, William raised a glass, commanding the attention of the room. "To new beginnings," he declared, his eyes skimming the crowd before pausing, almost imperceptibly, on Lucy. "And to the wonderful connections we make along the way." A chorus of agreement swept through the crowd, glasses clinking like chimes in a summer breeze. Lucy's smile faltered for just a second, a crack so small I might have imagined it. The meal was exquisite, each course more decadent than the last, but I barely tasted any of it. My attention kept slipping to William, who made his rounds, pausing longer than usual at our end of the table. When he reached us, he flashed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mark, Lucy," he said smoothly. "Enjoying yourselves?" Lucy nodded, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. "It's been a lovely weekend, William," she said, her voice too measured. "Good, good." His gaze lingered on her, and I felt something snap inside me. But before I could react, William's attention shifted back to the room. The rest of the dinner was a blur. When the music started, couples moved to the makeshift dance floor. Lucy looked at me, hesitation flickering across her face. "Want to dance?" she asked, her voice soft. I shook my head, the effort to smile too much to muster. "You go ahead." She hesitated, then nodded. Moments later, she was swept up in the crowd, moving gracefully under the string lights. I watched as William joined her, the distance between them shrinking with each step. My jaw clenched as they spun together, the laughter between them only fueling my silent rage. When they finally separated, Lucy caught my eye. The moment stretched, heavy with everything we hadn't said. She approached, her steps faltering as she reached the table. "Mark," she began, but before she could say more, a guest stumbled nearby, breaking the moment. I stood abruptly. "I need some air," I muttered and walked off before she could follow. The beach was dark, save for the pale light of the moon. I walked until the voices from the party were only whispers on the wind. The waves lapped at the shore, soothing, rhythmic. I breathed deeply, trying to quell the storm churning inside me. Behind me, footsteps crunched on the sand. I turned to see Lucy standing there, her expression torn between guilt and defiance. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but brittle. "I'm listening," I said, crossing my arms to brace myself. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no pretense. The night air wrapped around us, cool and damp, as Lucy stood in front of me on the sand, her eyes reflecting the fractured light of the moon. There was a long pause, a heartbeat stretched into eternity, before she spoke. "Mark, I need to be honest," she said, the words trembling on the edge of her lips. "This weekend, it was supposed to be a chance for me to find clarity." The weight of her confession pressed down on me, pushing the breath from my lungs. My voice came out ragged, barely above a whisper. "Clarity about what?" She looked away, her gaze fixed somewhere on the horizon where the sea met the sky, endless and dark. "About us. About what we've become and what we used to be." I took a step back, the damp sand shifting under my feet, stealing my balance. The truth was no longer lurking, it was here, raw and unblinking. "Lucy, I need you to tell me everything. No more half-truths. I can't take it." Her eyes met mine, filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. "Mark, I think I fell out of love with you a long time ago. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." The confession hit like a cold wave, numbing and unrelenting. I felt my fingers go numb as the words sank in. The wind carried the distant sound of laughter from the party, a cruel contrast to the silence between us. "And William?" I forced the name out, each syllable cutting my tongue. She nodded, a single, reluctant movement. "It started out as nothing. Just work, friendly conversations. But then, it became more." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the question tasting of betrayal and disbelief. "Because I was afraid," she whispered, as if admitting it would make it more real. "Afraid of what it would mean, of what it would do to us, to the kids. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, something I could walk away from." "And can you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. She looked at me, her eyes full of regret. "I thought so, but being here, seeing him. I don't know anymore. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry." The ocean roared behind us, filling the silence with its timeless, indifferent song. I turned away, looking out at the dark water, its surface glistening under the pale moonlight. There was a pull, an urge to scream, to rage at the universe for unraveling my life in the span of a weekend. But the anger drained out of me, leaving only a hollow ache. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice lifeless, a shell of the man I had been just days before. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know that we can't keep pretending. We can't go back to the way things were." The realization settled over me, cold and final. "Lucy, I don't think I can do this anymore." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears from falling. I wanted to fight for us, for what we had, but I can't be the only one fighting. She stepped closer, as if to reach for me, but stopped herself. The distance between us was more than physical now, it was a chasm that no words could bridge. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said, meeting her eyes one last time. "And now we have to live with that." The sound of footsteps on the sand made us turn. William stood a few yards away, his silhouette stark against the starlit sky. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper, something that had already broken the life Lucy and I had built together. Without another word, I walked past them, my feet carrying me up the beach and away from the party, from the island, from everything that had once been mine. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded into the distance, replaced by the soft, rhythmic lapping of the waves and the mournful cry of seabirds. The stars above blurred as tears finally came, hot and relentless. When I reached the end of the beach, where sand met the rugged rocks, I sat down and looked out over the sea. I thought of Emma and Daniel, of the life we'd have to explain to them, the pieces of our broken family that would never fit the same way again. The night wore on, and as the first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, I knew that when I left this island, I would be leaving behind more than just a marriage. I would be leaving behind the man I thought I was and stepping into a life that was no longer familiar, a life defined by absence and endings. And as the sun broke the night, I felt the finality of it, sharp and cold, settling into my bones.